Well, good evening. Welcome back again to Herp-a-Derp Orlando. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Again, since I'm trying to transition the channel to kind of focus more on the cooler aspects of nature, especially here in the Orlando area, whether that be in the theme parks or outside of the theme parks. Tonight we're going to do a little bit of urban herpetology. About 2 nights ago, we had an absolute massive rainstorm. As you can hear, that's really promoted a lot of breeding activity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the pond itself, show you some of the video that I captured of all of these various little frogs that are out trying to breed and hopefully make lots of little baby tadpoles here soon, and talk about the really cool aspects of these different species that you'll see out here. There's a couple different ones that I want to talk about. There's right around 3 to 4 species that we pretty regularly see out here, so let's hope we can find some. So this is kind of a neat find. This is an American bullfrog, Rana catesbiana or Lithobates catesbiana, if you're boring and like to use old nomenclature that doesn't work anymore. These are fairly common frogs around here in Central Florida, but you usually don't see them in really high abundances. Usually you'll only find maybe 5 to 10 in a given night around a particular wetland, but they are a really cool frog because they're incredibly adaptable. You find that these things can get invasive out in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and California, where they can completely take over ecosystems and get absolutely freaking massive, with tadpoles the size of beer cans, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And the reason they can get that big is because they're able to overwinter in a location in a given, so that way they can basically live an entire year and a half in a pond before they have to metamorphose. Now this is different than a lot of other species. Pretty much anything outside of ranids usually don't overwinter, and that overwintering allows them to just grow bigger and bigger and bigger, so by the time that they metamorphose they just come out absolutely massive, which is in quite contrast to something like a southern toad that'll come out no bigger than about 1/4 of an inch. So let me let this little guy go and we'll get back to trying to find some more cool stuff. Oh, so we have a really cool little find here. This is a southern leopard frog, Ranus phoenocephala, or Lithobates phoenocephalus, if you like really terrible taxonomy. These are super common throughout most of these little retention ponds here in Central Florida. I find them quite regularly. The one that we've got here is a little juvenile male. I've been finding a ton of these here lately in this little pond, and you can occasionally hear one of them calling. I think it might be a little bit older of a male, but I think we're kind of not quite ready for them to start breeding yet. That's why you can mostly only hear those southern toads here tonight and not anything else. But an absolutely really cool species. Something that's kind of interesting about southern leopard frogs rather, is they have a bunch of very closely related species where you have things like the northern leopard frog, Granite pipiens, which is super widespread, just like the southern leopard frog. And then you could have these really isolated little pocket species that only exist in these very small little river drainages. So whether that be around the Long Island region of New York, or some of this very isolated pockets of leopard frogs that are present in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Really cool group of species. I particularly like my southern leopard frogs because they can get really pretty and come in a wide variety of different colors. Unfortunately, all the ones that I've seen around here kind of have this more ruddy brown look to them, so they're not exactly the most pretty frogs in the world. I do a lot of work with southern leopard frogs as a part of my work with Perkinsia, which is a protist pathogen that's been wiping out all of our wonderful ranid frogs like the bullfrog that you saw earlier, as well as some of these leopard frogs. And my personal favorite, the gopher frog, which we're not going to find anywhere near here, because while I do love my little urban ecology landscape that we have here around my apartment, it's not quite the right habitat for some of the more sandhill specialist species that you'd expect in the places. Anyways, let's let this little guy go, and we'll go ahead and go see the main event for tonight, all the southern toads breeding everywhere. onto the piece of resistance tonight. Just about everywhere, as you can hear as well as just see clearly, there's southern toads absolutely everywhere. This is the main group that's breeding tonight. Southern toads are very, very flashy breeders, which basically means they get into a location, they breed over the course of 2 to 3 nights, drop off tadpoles. The tadpoles will be in that location for about a month or so, and then they'll quickly metamorphose. So in about a month from now, we're going to see tiny little, less than dime-sized frogs just hopping around everywhere. So it's really cool how they have these big mass breeding events that put as many toads out there into the world as possible, which allows them to avoid predation and all that kind of fun stuff. As well as it allows them to avoid losing the pond due to desiccation. So especially here in Florida, we do have to worry about hydro period a lot, where wetlands can either dry down or fill very rapidly in some cases. So it's a really cool phenomenon here. So southern toads are basically going to unbury themselves from all these little nooks and crannies that you're seeing all around me, and then head into the pond right after these large rain events, because basically the rain is what's going to trigger them to say, okay, it's time to breed. And they're going to book it to all these ponds and start calling as much as they possibly can. Now once they get into the pond and they start calling, if they're lucky and there's females also present as well, basically the males will almost glue themselves to the females. They're going to hold on for dear life and hope that she's willing to be receptive when it comes to dropping off eggs that he can fertilize. It is quite a process, and this whole position is called amplexus. There's a lot of different forms of it, but honestly, most frog species here in the U.S. just use something called inguinal, which basically means the male's going to wrap around the waist of the female and just kind of hold on for dear life until she decides if she wants to breed or not. So it's kind of this odd circumstance where it's both controlled by the males and females to some extent. Now sometimes it can get a little bit out of hand, and you do occasionally find drowned both males and females, because oftentimes what will happen is you'll have a big mass pile on where you'll have multiple males trying to grab onto one female, especially because the females get so much larger than the males. Now once all this breeding activity is done and the females laid her eggs and the males fertilized them, they're all going to go way back up into those little holes that they emerged from here earlier and try to dig back down and not be super active. They may be a little bit more active as they forage around here for food, especially during the moist, cool evenings like tonight. But for the most part, they're pretty much done with all their major breeding activity after this one big event, at least for the year here. These breeding events can be timed quite infrequently, so basically some places may breed earlier than others, and it all just kind of depends on when a location got rain, as well as how long it took for a particular location to fill up with water, so that way the frogs actually had something to go to. These southern toads, and pretty much all frogs, have this really cool innate ability to really detect, without even getting out of their burrows oftentimes, how well that pond has filled up. And usually they're about 90% right. Every once in a while they'll get there, and it won't be quite time yet, but it's still really fascinating how they have this almost innate ability. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed coming along with me this evening, and I really appreciate my wonderful videographer here, Rachel. While she hasn't been as many videos lately, just because we're kind of transitioning the channel away to be a little bit more nature-y focused, whether that be in the theme parks or not. I hope you all have enjoyed it so far. As always, if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. And hopefully y'all are learning at least a little bit more about the really cool urban ecology that's going on right in your backyard. With that, y'all have a good evening.